Space, the final frontier. This is the Observer's Notebook, the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. Its mission to explore the solar system, to seek out new observations and data, to boldly go where no podcast has gone before. And now the host of the Observer's Notebook, Tim Robertson.
Hello and welcome to episode 145 of the Observer's Notebook. This is a continuing series of our 75th anniversary of the ALPO. Yes, sir, we are 75 years old this year. This is the official podcast of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. My name is Tim Robertson. I host the Observer's Notebook podcast, and I'm also the coordinator of the training program within the ALPO. The Association of Lunar Planetary Observers collects and analyzes observations of various solar system bodies and associated phenomenon and publishes detailed reports concerning these bodies in its quarterly publication, The Journal of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. This podcast depends upon donations from you, our listeners, to keep it alive. If you enjoy what you hear on the podcast, you can donate to it via Patreon by giving as little as $1 a month. If you feel even more generous, for $5, you receive early access to the podcast before it goes public. For a monthly donation of $10, you receive a copy of the Novice Observer's Handbook, and for $35 a month, you receive producer credits on the podcast. You can find out more at www.patreon.com/observersnotebook. And if you'd like to join the ALPO, membership begins at only $18 a year. Find out more at www.alpo-astronomy.org. And you can also find us on Facebook. Just search for ALPO Astronomy. And yes, this podcast also has a Facebook page as well. Just search Observer's Notebook. And if you enjoy, please subscribe. That way you'll never miss another episode. And now, continuing on with our 75th anniversary celebration with astronomer, artist, Dr. Carlos Hernandez. Enjoy. All right, I'd like to welcome everybody back to this episode of the Observer's Notebook podcast, where we celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. And with us today, we're very honored to have astronomer, artist, Dr. Carlos Hernandez. Carlos Hernandez, welcome to the podcast, Carlos.
Thank you, Tim. It's my honor to be on the podcast. Thank you.
It's great. It's a long time coming. We've been chatting back and forth for a while to get this done and finally get it done. It's good.
I agree.
So why don't you give everybody a little bit of background just about yourself before we get into it?
Well, I am a physician. I'm a pediatrician. I'm living in Central California now, but I was actually mostly raised in South Florida. And that's when I started really getting into the planetary observing when I was living in South Florida. I was about 15, 16 years old when I had the pleasure and the honor of meeting up with two great ALPO members of the past and current, Don Parker and a great imager, and Jeff Bache, a great engineer astronomer who's still with us. Mm-hmm. But when I was a teenager, I was a member of an astronomy organization, the Southern Cross in South Florida. Okay. And I actually met up with Don and Jeff because I was asking around about if anyone was interested in planetary observing at the time, as I had just obtained a new Celestron 8-inch Schmidt gas, and I wanted to do some serious observing with it, to especially the planets. And so they took me on as a disciple, and I started to learn the art and science of planetary observing. And with Don Parker, I was really blessed that he was one of the pioneers in planetary imaging, and so I got to see the embryo or the genesis of planetary imaging. That, I mean, we look at sites now like Cloudy Nights and other websites around the internet, and we see all these incredible images taken by very talented imagers, Christopher Go and Damian Peach and other outstanding imagers. And but they actually built upon what Don and other early imagers were able to do, first with film, and Don started using film, and then he graduated to CCD camera. And ironically, he had to build his own camera at the beginning, and then later on obtained the commercial ones. But it was just amazing what Don was able to accomplish with the early. Yeah.
Now, had you always had an interest in astronomy, or was there some person or event that sparked your initial interest?
Well, when I was about 8 years old, I received a telescope, about a 1.5 inch telescope for Christmas, and I was always interested in the sciences. And I started using that small telescope. You could call it a tabletop or a refractor, and I used it to look at the moon and look at Jupiter and its satellites, similar to what Galileo was able to observe. And I could see Saturn, and I could just maybe make out the rings, but it was just amazing that I just started to look around and start seeing things. And then I graduated to a 3.5 inch reflector, and I started to be able to see more, and looked at more objects. I started learning the deep sky, the different Messier objects, and different other deep sky objects of interest, and as well as the planets. And then my interest gradually increased. I was exposed to the Mariner 9. Discoveries of Mars, and that piqued my interest in the planet Mars, and I started to more seriously observing Mars. So I was observing Mars. I've been observing Mars since about 1969. So, and then once I met up with Don and Jeff, my interest in Mars really took off.
Now, is that how you got involved with the ALPO?
Yes, that's when I met up with Don and Jeff. That's why my interest was with. I became a member of ALPO, and we were fortunate, the three of us, to have a mentor with Charles Capon. He was Charles Chick Capon, a former Mars recorder for the Mars section of ALPO, and he was a professional planetary astronomer that worked for Lowell Observatory, and he took us on as his students, as his disciples, and he actually taught us how to professionally study and discuss the observations that we were making of the planet Mars at the time. And he mentored us, and he guided Don with his imaging, because Chick was actually a pioneer himself in planetary imaging. And Jeff was an engineer, and he was a professional. Well, he was an instrument maker and other things, and so he had his technical expertise, and I was more the generalist. I was into the Martian nomenclature and the observing and the drawing and stuff like that. So each of us with Chick had a purpose, and it all came together, and we were able to make significant contributions. One contribution was, for a long time, it was thought by professional astronomers that the regression of the Martian North Polar Cap was linear or was steady. But with Don and Jeff and Chick and myself doing filar micrometer measurements of the North Polar Cap of Mars, we were able to prove that the regression of the North Polar Cap was not linear. And Don and Jeff, along with Chick, presented this finding at a professional planetary meeting, and the professional astronomers were just flabbergasted that a group of amateurs using what they would consider small telescopes, instruments, were able to make this finding. And that was one of the early beginnings of the amateur professional collaboration that we see a lot of today. But it was pretty rare for professionals at that time. And I'm talking about the early 80s, around
Right.
there, late 70s, early 80s. There was not usual, not typical for professionals to coordinate observations or data with amateurs, and it was the beginning. And now we see a lot of it, which is wonderful. You've got amateur astronomers with capable instruments and cameras looking for exoplanets and all these other, and supernova, and it's amazing. But yeah, it's come a long way.
Yeah, pro-am collaboration is a big deal in the ALPO. It has been for years, and like you mentioned, that was the start of it, really.
Yes, yeah.
So you were a member of the infamous Black Hole Gang, I take it.
Right. That's yeah, go ahead, Tim.
I've asked many people where the name came from, and no one's given me a good answer yet. Do you have anything?
Well, I think maybe Don and Chick came up with the name.
Sounds like something Don
Jeff
would do. It does sound like something Don.
Maybe Jeff contributed to it too, but
yeah,
it was just a fun name to have for the group, and a member of the group also was Tom Dobbins, who's also an ALPO member, and Tippy Dioria, who's known for the Winter Star Party. And so it was just a group of guys who enjoyed getting together and talking about planetary astronomy and all the things that we were doing. And it gave us a lot of things to do, and it was a fun time.
And if Don was involved, there was probably a lot of laughter involved too.
Oh, that was the thing about Don. He was incredibly talented, but he was one of the funniest people. Yep. It was impossible not to be around him and not laugh, because he was always making us and everyone else laugh. So
yeah, I met him on a few occasions, and I always had a good time. He was always very cordial, very nice guy, and very open with everyone.
Yeah,
good guy.
Yeah.
So what are some of your favorite memories about Don?
Oh, memories of Don is his personality, his laughter, but he was very knowledgeable about science and planetary astronomy, and he always pushed himself constantly, as far as how to improve his imaging with film. He would use special fine grain resolution film, TP2415, I think it was, and he would use it and put it into a hyper. He would hyper it, which would make the film more sensitive, and so he would try to constantly use different techniques and different methods in order to improve the sensitivity of the film that he was using to image the planets. And then later on, he would do the same thing with the CCD camera.
Okay. Now, you mentioned Chick, and Chick lived in Flagstaff, I believe, right?
Right. He lived mostly in Flagstaff, yeah.
And worked at Lowell Observatory. What about Observatory. How many interactions did you have with Chick, and what were they like?
Well, I mostly communicated by phone and mail with Chick, but we would get together. I did have the pleasure of going out to Flagstaff and observing Mars with him with the Lowell 24-inch.
Oh, nice!
So that was a great memory.
Yeah, I've had opportunities to use that telescope in the past too, and it's an amazing scope.
It is, and it was recently refurbished also. But so I was able to get together with Chick, and he was just wonderful. And the thing with Chick is that he was trained by Earl Carl Slifer, E.C. Slifer, who was of Lowell Observatory, of the Slifer brothers. It was Earl Slifer and Vesto Slifer, and Vesto Slifer was one of the pioneers in the discovery of the expansion of the universe, the Big Bang. I mean, Hubble is given credit, but it was actually his discovery of the expansion, along with a French Jesuit priest, Lacaille, I think, and they discovered the expansion, and then Hubble was able to prove it using the 100-inch telescope at Mount Wilson. But so you had Vesso Slipher and then Earl Slipher. Earl Slipher was one of the pioneers in planetary imaging. Using the Lowell 24-inch, he started imaging Mars back in 1905. And he continued to image Mars until 1964 when he passed away. And he literally took thousands upon thousands of images of the planet Mars showing changes, and they were phenomenal. And I mean, they may not be as sharp as some of the CCD images we see nowadays, but they did contain a lot of information, and he was the premier imager of the time. And then he and his brother Vesso Slipher in turn were trained by Percival Lowell himself.
Oh.
So Lowell trained the Slipher brothers, and the Slipher brother and Earl Slipher trained Chick, and then Chick trained us.
Wow.
So I guess
a pretty good lineage right there. That's impressive. Wow.
I guess in a way we were somehow trained by Lowell himself. So we were very fortunate. We were very lucky.
Very cool. And you mentioned Jeff Beach as well. I've tried for years to get Jeff on this podcast, and he'll say yes, and then he'll say no, and then he'll say yes. So if you could do anything about that, I'd appreciate it. But I think he would be a lot of fun to get on as well. He's quite the personality.
Yes, he is. And I really admire Jeff, and he's extremely knowledgeable, a wonderful person, and his family. And he's got so many stories that you'd have to have several podcasts with him, because he's just got so many stories to tell.
Well, yeah, I'll Google his name, and astronomy and all these articles come up of you guys and various years of observing Mars and things like that. And he writes really well. He's very articulate.
He's very articulate, very knowledgeable.
And it's just come on the podcast and say what you've written there. I don't know. I'll keep bugging him. Maybe someday he'll come on. I'll break him down.
One of the things that Jeff did with Chick and with us is he cataloged thousands of observations of Mars, and he had the clouds on Mars, the regular clouds and the dust clouds and stuff. And he produced a paper on it, which is a pretty impressive paper of the evolution of the clouds over the planet Mars. That was one of the things he did. And I was fortunate that Jeff and he's got had a incredible 16-inch f7 Newtonian reflector, and we actually prepared for the Shoemaker-Levy 9 impacts. We started practicing about a year before the impacts, or as soon as it was announced.
Wow!
That because the first impact was to occur in the afternoon in South Florida at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It was daylight. So we started observing Jupiter using his 16-inch f7. And then the day came on July 16th for the impact site A, or 21. And we started observing. We found Jupiter, and as we had before, but the skies are all blurry, and the heat and everything, and the image is bouncing around the field. But so we kept observing, and a little bit after 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Jeff thought he had seen something in the southern part of the disk of Jupiter, but he wasn't sure. And then we kept observing. And then as it got closer to 7 o'clock at night, the seeing all of a sudden steadied, and boom, we were able to see the impact A site. And that was amazing, because then he contacted Brian Marsden from CBAT, and he told us that we were the first persons on Earth to report the impact site visually, because the Hubble Space Telescope and other observatories, including one in Spain, had imaged the plume but they had not
That's
they hadn't sent their data until later that evening. So technically, Jeff and I, and his daughter also was part of the team that saw it, Natalie, and we were actually the first ones to actually report it. So, but
That's
it was
awesome.
it was an amazing time.
Yeah,
and
that was one of the
ahead.
most amazing things I've ever seen through a telescope, because it's
Yeah.
like you're watching live the things happening live on a planet, which you never see. You know,
Right. And I actually, with the Planetary Society, I had written a handbook for the event, and it looked at all the different scenarios of what the impact could look like. Because to be honest, most people were saying, most astronomers and professionals were saying it was going to be a dud, and that amateurs on Earth wouldn't be able to see anything unless you had these giant telescopes looking in the infrared,
right?
For the heat. But no one thought that you're going to see these giant black crescent marks.
Yeah,
that's over the southern hemisphere of the planet. So we were just flabbergasted and excited that it turned out the way it did. And then Jeff and I, for the next 6 days, for all the different impacts, we were able to see all the visible impacts over the southern part of the planet, and we followed it over a period of months and actually over a year, and to see how it evolved. And that was just a really amazing time.
That was a lot of fun during that time. I really enjoyed that. Now, you've been with the ALPO for a number of years. What have you seen in the evolution of the organization?
Well, what I've seen is it's comprised of very dedicated individuals who share their enthusiasm and their love for the study of planetary astronomy. And the ALPO has incorporated the media. They've learned to use the social media to expose other interested persons in planetary astronomy to ALPO, and using the new technology and stuff to show instantly. If in the past we'd have to wait to announce a discovery, a dust storm or a cloud or something like that, but now if someone sees anything instantaneously, it's able to be reported to the rest of the members of ALPO, and it's just amazing how we've progressed over the decades.
That's true. That's very true. Yeah. And that's one vehicle I've used with this podcast. And I also do the Twitter accounts for the ALPO, and just trying to get information out there as soon as I hear about it, just forward it on. Yeah.
I mean, the irony is that a lot of people think that amateurs cannot contribute to planetary astronomy because we've got all these giant telescopes, the Hubble, and giant telescopes in observatories, and we've got all these spacecraft orbiting the planets and stuff. But they have to realize that the observatories don't study the planets for the majority of times. There's very few observatories that are dedicated to monitoring the planets, including the Hubble. The Hubble only takes these fantastic images of the planets, but it's only a very small percentage of its observing time. And the same thing applies to the major observatories. So that actually the professionals actually depend upon amateurs, and especially now with these incredibly talented imagers, to monitor the planets, to see what's going on, and if it's an apparition of Mars, and we've got observers and imagers looking at Mars, and all of a sudden a dust storm develops, it's usually the amateurs that are the first ones to report it, not the professionals, and that's what they depend upon. So it's important for organizations such as the ALPO to bring together these interested parties in order to dispense the information to the public and to the professionals. So it's still a vital link in the chain.
That's very well said. True. Now let's talk about you for a minute. You're an artist, and I mean that in the most respected terms. I've seen your paintings online, and your artwork on your Facebook page and things like that. Are you formally trained in art?
I've had some training in art. I've art school in high school and stuff like that, but I've never had formal training in art. It's been mostly self-taught, and I started like everyone doing drawings. My earliest observations of Mars and the planets were made with pencil and drawings, and then I've used other media, including colored pencils and watercolor and different things until finally in the mid 90s to early 2000s I started getting involved with digital art.
Okay.
And so I've mostly moved over to digital, so most of my observations now are primarily digital.
Because you do these amazing planetary landscapes and things like that. They're just beautiful.
Well, thank you. But luckily we've got these great images taken by the spacecraft of the surface of Mars and other planets, and other images and data. And so using that, I am able to construct what I believe an observer, an astronaut standing on the surface of Mars or any other object would see as soon, using the information and certain the lighting and stuff like that. So I try to make the paintings as accurate as possible. And obviously, they may be a little bit artistic, but I try to make them as accurate as possible. And I do them primarily to be honest, to not just to produce the painting for the painting itself, which is fun, but also to educate. Because it's when we observe Mars and we observe a dust storm or other phenomena over the planet and the other planets, I like to explain to people what is actually going on, because it's not just a question of a pretty picture or a pretty image, but it's also to understand what's behind the phenomena that we're seeing. So that's one of my primary reasons for producing my paintings.
Okay, and you said now they're mostly digital drawings that you're doing?
Right. I make them on the computer, primarily using what's called Adobe Photoshop.
Okay. Wow. How long did it take you to perfect this?
Well, I guess to the level I am now, I guess it took some time, like decades, like over 20 years, I'd say. Probably close to 30. But it's just it's not something that anyone's going to pick up overnight. Right. But if they practice at it, like observing, they can improve upon it. And that's one of the things as far as drawing and observing the planets. An example in this case, Mars. I would argue that anyone, even if they had no artistic talent or considered that they had no artistic talent, if they started drawing what they saw through the telescope, if they took a blank disc and tried to represent what they see through the eyepiece on the planet Mars, if they did that constantly every night for a period of weeks, they would notice that their drawings would become better and more accurate. But it would also help train their eyes to see more detail. So it's not just a question of producing a nice, pretty drawing or a pretty picture. It's helping to train the eye in order to detect more detail over the planet.
That's very true. You're preaching to the choir right here. I run the training program for the ALPO, and that is my mantra. I mean, you got to get out there and observe. I have students come in the program that after making 10 drawings, they want to graduate, and I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way. You got. I don't judge them based upon their artistic ability. I judge them based upon what they're seeing on the planet. What are they able to identify and communicate in their drawing? It's not all about a pretty picture, and that's. And like you mentioned, I mean, the longer you observe, the better you train your eye to see finer details. Well, we've all been to star parties where you put, a galaxy in the eyepiece, and as an astronomer, you walk up to the eyepiece, you go, "Yeah, I see that galaxy there." Yeah, and then the public gets behind you and they don't see anything because your eyes have been trained to pick out the fine details of what you're seeing through the eyepiece.
That's true. That's true, Tim. And also, a good and a bad thing is that, the Hubble and other major observatories have taken these incredible images of Jupiter and Mars and the planets. And unfortunately, a lot of the public thinks that when they look through the eyepiece, they're going to see the same thing. And that's, you and I know that's not the case. And you have to be extremely patient when you're observing. And I've been observing Mars like over an hour, and the seeing was very average or below average. And I would just wait for an hour to get 30 seconds of steady seeing in order to see what's visible on the planet. So you have to be very patient, and you're not going to always see the same amount of detail over the planet, depending on, which longitude is facing you, right, or, what features are visible, and obviously your seeing conditions, the size of your instrument. I mean, all these are factors that you have to take into when you're observing. But it's just a matter of practice. And the more you, like you said, the more you practice, the more you're going to see.
That's true. That's true. And that's a hard thing for people to understand, because like you mentioned, they see the Hubble photographs. They see Damian Peach's photographs. They see, people like that. Oh, yeah, this is what they saw. Well, this is not what Damian saw through his telescope. This is what he imaged through his telescope with an expensive CCD camera and software after the fact.
Right.
It's not what you see when you look through the eyepiece. And that's what you try to communicate to people. And this is what's possible with the telescope and a CCD imager. But as for physically seeing those things, sometimes you can, like you said, when the scene pops at a certain second and you got, a second and a half of perfect seeing, you can see that detail. But you got to be looking through the eyepiece to do that. That's the only way you can train yourself.
Exactly. And an example, back in 1979 or 1980, around there, we were observing Mars. It was a half helix apposition of Mars. And we were looking at the North Polar Cap, which was visible at the time. And with using my C8, one of the early C8s, it was a great optics, I was able to discern what was called the Rima tenuis, which is a rift in the North Polar Cap, before Don and Jeff were able to pick it out with their 12.5-inch telescopes. So, but I think that was a factor. The fact that I had been training my eye for some time.
Right.
So, the instrument was excellent. The seeing cooperated, but because I had trained my eye, I was able to discern that feature at the time when other imagers and observers were using larger instruments. So you'd be amazed as to what you can see if you train yourself.
It's very true. Very true. Good point. Now, what tools do you use when you're observing the planets?
Well, obviously, depending on the instrument I'm using, one of my primary instruments at this time is a 9-inch Maxitov Cassegrain, a Rumac Maxitov that a friend of mine, Michael Palamidi, constructed for me with excellent optics. It's got 1/8 optics on it. And I've observed this tiny detail on Mars up to 800x and more. But that's my primary instrument, and I use that. And depending on which planet I'm observing, I also use at times different filters, Ratten filters, including the red filters and the orange filters for the albedo features, and the blue filters for the clouds, and green for the ice. But so I use that, and depending on the what I'm trying to observe and how large the planet appears in the eyepiece, I try different techniques.
Okay, all right. What suggestions would you give someone just starting out with lunar and planetary observing? I know you mentioned spend time on the eyepiece, but what other things?
Well, try to, any observer, I would say, learn as much about the object or the subject that you're observing. Example, in this case, Mars, try to read up on it as much as possible, so that when you're looking through the eyepiece, it's not just, oh, yeah, I see the dark features, the albedo features. Oh, yeah, I see the North Polar Cap and stuff like that. But if you try to actually learn about the objects, what you're actually looking at, I think it helps the observer appreciate more what is in the eyepiece field at the time. And obviously, as I said before, you have to be very patient. You're not going to see everything all at one time, and the observer is going to have to figure out, depending on where they live, their latitude. People in the northern, more north, are affected by scene conditions more than the people in the south, and so you have to figure out when the best time to observe, and always allow, one of the rules is you always allow, no matter what instrument you have, time for your instrument to cool off before you start observing. Because if you take a telescope that's indoors and you take it out immediately and it's cool to cold weather, the heat coming off the instrument is going to affect your observing. So you have to allow the telescope to cool before you start observing. Make sure your instrument, because some telescopes are more sensitive to collimation, make sure that the instrument is collimated, and try not observing over concrete. And if you can observe over a grassy area, that will help with your what's called the local scene conditions. And if you do all these things, these procedures, it will increase the odds of you having a successful observing session.
That's very good. Good advice. What's your current? You mentioned the 9-inch Maksutov you have. What other observing equipment do you currently have?
I have. I've got my old C8 and
that the orange tube one.
The orange tube one, the 1976. I've had that one. Yeah, and that one's given me great images. It still gives great images. And some other instruments. I've got a 8-inch Klev Cassegrain. It uses a Manjin mirror, and it's a Russian design, and it gives great images as well. And I still have my mirror for my 12.5-inch Newtonian that I've used in the past. I have to set it up again, but I'm hoping to use these instruments as well as other instruments in the area to observe the planets whenever I have the opportunity.
That's great. That's great. Do you have any other interests outside of astronomy and art?
When I can, I enjoy fishing and the outdoors, and so I try to participate in that as much as possible as well.
That's great. You a good fisherman?
I think so. Well, at least I'm from Florida, so I'm usually a bass fisherman.
Okay.
And Florida and California are two great places if you're into bass fishing. And but I've also enjoyed saltwater fishing as well, and so as long as I'm able to have fun and enjoy the outdoors, I think that's the important thing.
That's true. Well, Carlos, this has been fun. Do you have anything else you'd like to share with our listeners?
No, I just what we've talked about before, and just do the best, and the main thing I would tell anyone, Tim, is to have fun. It's great to share your observations and talk to other people about what you know and your what you observed or what you've imaged. But the important thing is for the person to have fun making the observations, because once you stop having fun, it becomes a drudgery, and I hope that would never happen to anyone. And just have fun, but if possible, share your observations and your interest with others in organizations such as the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers, and that way it gives even more meaning to what you're doing.
That's true. Yeah, get the observation out there, because, like you mentioned, the professionals do rely on us in a lot of ways.
That's true. Yes, very true.
In a lot of ways, there's a lot more of us than there are of them.
That is true. Yeah. That is true.
Yeah, very good. All right. Well, Carlos, I want to thank you again for coming on the podcast today. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Tim. It's my pleasure, and best wishes to all the members of the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers, and happy 75th anniversary.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, that'll do it for this episode of the Observer's Notebook podcast. I again want to thank Carlos Hernandez for coming on the podcast and giving us a little insight into his background, his love for art and astronomy. I hope you all enjoyed it. We upload a new episode of the Observer's Notebook on the 1st and 15th of every month. You can subscribe to us on iTunes. If you do, please head over there and give us a 5-star rating and a review. I really appreciate it. It brings more people to the podcast. You can also listen to us on Apple Radio, iHeartRadio, Soundcloud, Spreaker, Google Play, Stitcher, and Amazon Echo and Spotify. And we are also now on the ALPO YouTube channel. Just go over there and check that out as well. You can help support the podcast by donating to via Patreon by giving up to $35 a month, where you will receive 1 year's membership to the ALPO and producer credits on the podcast. And with that, I want to thank the producers of this podcast, Steve Siedentop and Michael Moyer, for their continued generous support of the podcast. Thank you very much, gentlemen. The link for Patreon, as well as the link for the ALPO, is in the show notes. You can get a hold of me at commentman@commentman.net or on Twitter at @ObserversNPPod. Until next time, I hope that you all have clear and steady skies. Thanks for listening.